to catch the first round of our top 8 here in Copenhagen. Hello and welcome to this, our top 8 of Grand Prix, Copenhagen. Oof. And Martin Dang, local boy made good, snuck into the top 8 in 8th place with blue-white control. But he is, of course, having got in at 8th, up against the number 1 seed who will be on the play for the entirety of this top 8, assuming he can make it through each round. That is Tobias Mora on mono red aggro.
Right. We can see Martin Dang already having a Gideon's approach in hand and a cellular wreckage and some lands and a Teferi, so he kind of has the tool he needs to come out ahead on this matchup, and more importantly, he doesn't have to face down a turn 1 Bowman's Courier.
Yeah, Bowmat Courier, source of both damage and guard advantage that can be a real pain in the neck. Soulscar Mage along with Kari Zev is a relatively decent amount of damage being threatened here, but things could be worse, and it's going to be really interesting how long this first game takes, because if it takes not very long at all, that almost certainly great for Tobias Maurer, whereas Martin Dang would very happily have this game won last a very long time indeed, because his list is not one that wins fast.
Correct. What Martin Dang is looking to do here is stem the bleeding a little bit and then play the cat and mouse game between how many creatures are you willing to attack into my open 4 mana. And if his opponent respects Cellular Wreckage too much, he gets enough of a life advantage that he can then get to the place where he plays the Fairy while keeping Cellular Wreckage up, and that's where Martin kind of takes over the game. And we'll see here him probably taking a lot of damage early game to be able to sequence his counter spells and removals correctly, so they will be useful. And hopefully for Martin, his opponent won't have too much to follow up and play around the Cellular Wreckage as much as his opponent wants to. Yeah.
So Martin Dang has managed to make it through to turn 4 with his Cellular Wreckage mana on 11 life. He had the key counter spell for Hazaret the Fervent number 1, Hazaret the Fervent number 2 coming along here, but it may be that he's not too terribly worried about it, depending on how it works out that this turn plays out. He elects to use Seal Away there on Goblin Chainwhirler, having already Essence Scattered Hazaret number 2, suggesting to me that either there's not a Cellular Wreckage in his hand,
right,
or he wants to wait as long as possible to play it.
He wants to wait as long as possible to play it. Also, this is just more effective play, because Tobias plays at Hazaret pre-combat to take a counterspell out of Martin Dang, and that also gives him more options about how he's gonna continue in his attack step, whether he has to play around Cellular Wreckage or not. But since Martin Dang can double spell, this is just better for him. And so interestingly enough, Martin gets plays Cellular Wreckage here instead of, I think I saw an Essence Scatter there. Also a Blink of an Eye, and that's because he has Teferi in his hand. So if he finds a land here and has a 2-mana interaction, that's an easy road to victory against a red deck that doesn't have a lot of things going on the board.
Yeah, Dang on 10 life here, but not really facing too much pressure, and he has weathered the early storm comparatively well here. 2 copies of Hazaret down already, and already looking pretty decent with not too much damage on a per turn basis coming from Tobias Mara, though I'm sure that he would have been very happy to hit a 5th land drop on that turn.
Right. Every turn that goes by where Martin doesn't hit his 5th land, Tobias gets a more and more of a chance to kind of put Martin Dang in an awkward enough position where Teferi won't be enough to close out the game. So it's going to be pretty important for Dang to find it soon here. Still misses the land drop, finds a search for his counter instead. And he doesn't have tons of cards in his graveyard, only 4, so it won't count as a virtual land for a couple more turns, and a couple more turns is not something he will have before he needs that land for Teferi. So this is gonna get close, even though Tobias doesn't have any cards in hand currently.
Yeah, Martin Dang's been doing everything right that he can here to tread water, keep his life total as high as possible. But if he can't find that land soon, all of his best efforts may be for naught. Tobias Mora doing a reasonable job here of attacking in, and here comes the one creature in Martin Dang's deck. It's one that dodges removal in its own special way by simply firing off all of the +1/+1 counters for damage where needed.
Alright, so this attack makes it so that you would assume there's... Alright, Rekindling Phoenix is quite good here. I think Martin still has a chance to draw land, and he does, because now he can play that the Fairy and leave Blink up to protect it. And I think it's very smart of him to not block and shoot with that Walking Ballista, because this way he's going to be able to protect his Fairy even better if he does this play this turn.
Yeah, 5 life, obviously not a lot to be working with, but without too many cards in Tobias Mara's hand, he's not nearly as in danger as he might be against a fuller grip, and he can afford to...
Oh, already played a land.
Oops. He can afford to make plays that leave him just a little bit safer.
Alright, so it's important for Martin here that Tobias doesn't hit anything too powerful this turn, since he only plays a bounce spell. And if Tobias doesn't hit any spell this turn, only hits a land, I think Martin is quite a lot ahead. Where he can... So I think the correct players to block the Goblin Chain Ruler, shoot the Soulscar Mage twice, and then... I guess you could do this too. Yeah, maybe this play is actually even better, because he gets to keep his Walking Ballista, and unless Tobias has a burn spell here, he'll be able to survive. Okay.
As it is, there is a shock though. So a few options on lines there. The one that Martin Dang going with, not quite working out for him. That meaning a pretty quick game one.
Right.
And as we said at the start of this game, if it's quick, that probably means that Tobias Mara has won. And that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, I thought for a second there that Tobias was going after the Fury, but it does make sense that it goes for Martin's face, especially when Martin's life total is the same amount of loyalty that the Fury has, and especially if he draws a chalk there. It's a pretty hard block for Martin there, whether he wants to go for the Soul Scar or whether he wants to just block the Soul Scar, blink the Phoenix, and in that way stay further ahead unless Tobias has something.
Well, while these guys are sideboarding, we're going to get a chance to have a look in on some of our other games. I guess that the one that has the most potential for more fireworks is actually one that's comparatively similar to the match that we've already been with, that being Javier Dominguez against Joachim Staller-Nielsen. Dominguez, 10th ranked player in the world, playing a different blue-white control list. His has Approach to the Second Sun, which obviously the life gain on it pretty relevant. The fact it can close out games a bit quicker, kind of helpful. But he's up against, if anything, an even more aggressive version of mono red than that of Tobias Mora, in as much as it's the version that has Flame of the Keld. And we can see here that while Dominguez has Teferi in play, he's facing down a shock on just 2 life. If our life totals are indeed correct. Okay, on 7 life. So now our life totals allow this to make a little bit more sense.
Right, I think Joachim's... It seems like Javier is heavily ahead here. But I do think that Joachim is even better set up to beat these blue-white decks, because the threats are even cheaper and it's harder to deal with so many of them very quickly. Also, Joachim has more ways to burn Javier out in comparison to other mono-red decks, but as we can see, Javier was able to save the storm early and got ahead. Yeah,
the bit that we missed there is that there had already been an Approach to the Second Sun played in the game. So when the second copy got turned up a little bit earlier, thanks to Ibnu Rivulet allowing for it to be dug up a little bit quicker, that was enough for Javier Dominguez to take his game 1. So for those of you hoping for semi-finals that do not feature only red decks, your hope is still alive. Of course, you know, Martin Dang could just rattle off 2 in a row, win his quarterfinal, but this way round, Javier Dominguez definitely flying the flag of a different country than all of these red states.
Right. But then again, Saul can still win both other games, right? I guess we'll just have to see.
We certainly will. I certainly do like Joachim Staller Nilsson's deck quite a bit. Flame of the Killed is kind of an interesting one that I'm intrigued to see how it's going to work out. Just a quick score update for you. Francisco Sanchez, the reason we're not jumping across to his match against Lucas Bahon is because they're currently shuffling also. It was Sanchez that won game one, it going with the play. Sanchez the one that finished higher in the Swiss, and he was able to take down game one in the mirror match. We have one match as well that we couldn't quite fit on our camera tables, that being that of Tim Kenke and Christian Ahlström, but we will of course bring you updates from those as and when we find them.
It's almost as if they timed them just to mess with our production value. Not okay.
Not okay. But that's all right. We'll let them off because they're going to give us some more games of Magic soon enough. We would certainly hope. These players just finishing up their sideboarding. And after sideboarding, these blue-white lists, they do have a little bit more in terms of win conditions.
Mm-hmm.
Lyra Dawnbringer, a big addition that they have that really ends up requiring some pretty specific additions from the sideboard of their opponents.
Right.
Because 5 toughness, enough that most of the removal spells of the red decks on their own are not going to be enough.
Yeah, the only real good option there is Fight with Fire, which is awkward in the sense that it doesn't... you can't use it to burn your opponent, which is usually a really bad thing for a burn spell against a control matchup, given that they're not running really any other creatures except these Baneslayer Angels / Lyra Dawnbringers. However, the kicker mode actually comes up in these matchups because of Settled Wreckage. Since Settled Wreckage is the best way of these blue-white decks to stave off the aggression from the red decks, the red decks tend to get a ton more lands on the battlefield, and together with Chandra's +1 ability, which gives you 2 mana, kickering Fight with Fire happens a lot more than you would expect.
Yeah, and anytime it happens, it's always a great moment for coverage. Great big spells, finishing off games, killing off creatures. Things that are less good for coverage, mulligans though, and it looks like we might have a few of them here.
Yeah, so I think mulligans definitely hurt the blue-white control deck more in this matchup, because it kind of needs a lot of things to get ahead on this matchup. If it's able to micromanage the opponent by playing a removal, playing a counterspell, and then resolving Teferi on a pretty silent board, that's where they get ahead. However, when you mulligan, it's going to be a lot harder to have all those things going right up your alley, because against these red decks you have less time to play card advantage cards such as Glimmer of Genius, meaning that it's going to be harder to both hit your land drops and deal with your opponent's creatures and get that Teferi and be able to protect it.
It's a big ask getting all of those ands.
Right. And the only way that mulligans could still be fine for you is if you have something like a Lyra Dawnbringer. Lyra Dawnbringer can kind of let you come back into a game where you haven't been able to deal with your opposing creatures too much, since the swing of Lyra Dawnbringer is just that great.
Yeah, all of the different elements, the toughness, the flying, the lifelink, all working together very nicely. I guess the only thing that Martin Dang could reasonably ask for would it'd be nice if she wasn't a legendary so you could get a couple of them in play at the same time.
Then there'd be 6/6s too.
Yeah. Bomat Courier coming along, dealing a point of damage to Martin Dang on attacks there. Dang currently without white mana.
Yeah, it seems like
Rivulant, not ideal.
Martin's mana is going to be real awkward there. He has a negate, but early in the turns, negate doesn't really have a lot of targets against his mono red decks. It's mostly until turn 4 where your opponent has Chandra, where you can actually deal with something. Also, Field of Ruin is not fantastic against a mono red deck that only runs mountains, meaning it will not be able to help you fix your mana.
So in terms of fixing mana, one option that's pretty good though is Sensor cycling that at the end of the turn, finds Martin Dang the planes that he so desperately needs. It looks like there is a copy of Lyra Dawnbringer in hand, so right now it's all about biding time, and Invoke the Divine in hand will certainly help with that, gaining some life and setting up a really interesting question for Tobias Mora. He doesn't want his opponent gaining life, but equally sacrificing his hand for just 2 cards, not quite good enough.
Not worth it, no. So this is, I wouldn't say it's bad for Martin Dang, but he is trading 3 mana for 1 mana, which is pretty awkward in this matchup, since now there's going to be more pressure on him, his Lyra Dawnbringer, doing even higher lifting or bigger lifting, heavier lifting maybe.
Yeah, all of it. Just
all
lifting.
of it. Right.
Arm day.
And she's going to do a lot of lifting, this Lyra Dawnbringer, because not only is Martin Dang inefficiently trading his card mana-wise, but he's also missing land drops, which is going to make this quite a lot harder.
And the fact that Ibnu Rivulet tapping for blue mana is even costing him damage is really painful. I mean, obviously he'd rather take 1 point of damage from Ibnu Rivulet to cast Negate than all of the damage that Ashandra represents. However, he is in a rough old shape here, as he has to once again pass the turn without having played more lands. Etc. as Cantor the play for him, so it will mean that in future his draws are better, but how long his future lasts is all going to be down to how tenaciously Tobias Mora can continue to attack this life total.
A small, almost unnoticed victory there was that Tobias elected to go for Chandra, Torch of Defiance, into Martin Dang's awkward mana base, because Martin Dang wasn't representing mana for disallow, meaning that this was the highest chance where Tobias could go for that ever so important Chandra. But since Martin Dang's only play was a negate that turn, it played perfectly into Martin's hand. And otherwise, we could have had our game being over already here.
As it stands, our game might very well be over very shortly. Just 1 point of life remaining for Martin Dang here. He's passed the turn with mana up. That mana, not the appropriate mana to be able to cast Settle the Wreckage. Big swings here from Tobias Mora, and there's the handshake. Yeah. A really unfortunate set of draws for Martin Dang there, and that means that we have our first semi-finalist, Tobias Mora, advancing through with his mono-red aggro list. We knew that if he was going to win, it was going to be fast, and that was about as fast as these matches come.
Most definitely, Tim.
So mono-red aggro and Tobias Mora will be advancing to the semi-finals. We're going to get a chance to have a look at one of our other matches in our feature match area soon enough. It might be worth figuring out who he's actually going to be playing against, that being the winner of the match between Joachim Staller-Nielsen and Javier Dominguez. So this is blue-white approach versus mono-red flame. We've called it the Flame of Kel deck. And Javier Dominguez already a game up against Joachim Staller-Nielsen. That meaning that a little bit more work for the mono-red list to achieve there. Looks like these guys still finishing up their shuffling. In fact, everyone was shuffling when we went to the start of that game. Everyone's still shuffling when we get to the end of it. And the reason that they're shuffling is actually that we talked about red decks being fast. They're at 1-1 as well now. Javier Dominguez and Joachim Staller-Nielsen. They had a brief look at each other's deck lists just as they finished off sideboarding, but I've also got an update from our back table. We're not going to get a chance to have a look in on Lucas Blajon because Lucas Blajon is out of our top 8 already, y'all.
Wow.
He's lost to Francisco Sanchez, the 3rd seed, defeating the 6th seed, 2 straight games, and he will be advancing to semi-final number 2 up against the winner of Tim Kernke and Christian Ahlström.
Right. So it's going to be interesting to see whether Javier being on the play is going to be enough for him to kind of win in this matchup. I'm not even sure Javier has an edge post-board, given that Joachim gets to remove all of those awkward cards that he could have in the main deck and get cards like Chandra or even Fight with Fire. It's going to be interesting to see. However, Javier being on the play here is going to be pretty huge.
It didn't help him. It didn't help him too much
in game 1.
He was on the draw. And
it was on the draw in game 1. Yes, right.
So let's see whether or not these players can keep their opening hands. 7 cards, obviously the preference. Looks like for Joachim at least not good enough. His is the list with the fewest lands in the top 8. Understandable given that he's got a very, very low curve indeed. But you really don't want to get stuck too low, even with this list that has a very low curve, because if you're only casting 1 spell per turn, it doesn't take very long to get outclassed by your opponents.
No, you're right, Tim. As long as you not have a Bowman's Courier with a bunch of cards on it, the perfect number of lands that Joachim would be stuck on would be somewhat about 3 lands in play. So you could cast everything and cast multiple spells a turn to get ahead. We could also see a small glimpse of Javier's hand, and I think it's 5 lands, seal away in actually History of Benalia. His Abinala is not usually great against these red decks because of opposing Goblin Chain Dwellers, them being hard to block, and they can just stave off all the knights. However, looking at Joachim Salle's deck list, he has so many 1-drops, and they're all kind of trades against these knight tokens, so his Abinalia almost becomes like a kitchen sink in this matchup where Joachim Salle's curve is a lot lower. So that's an smart and interesting addition from Javier post sideboard.
All right, Solskjaer Mage, the first play of the game here, coming from Joachim. Even though he is on the draw in this matchup, he mulliganed and scried to the bottom there, suggesting that maybe he's still digging for something. He does at least have that second land, though, and it looks like a Fanatical Firebrand coming to join that Solskjaer Mage.
Alright, so we see a steal away of one of the 1-drops here. And I assume we're going to see another 1-drop. There's a lot of those in this deck. Another Solskjaer Mage. And here's the History Binala going to come down. And this is a pretty big play against this deck.
Yeah, History of Benalia not automatically good in this sort of matchup, working very well here. Get that first knight down and potentially roadblock a lot of what Stalin Nilsson has going on. At this point, if he's got a shock or similar, dealing with that knight just to clear things out of the way, a great option. But
even better, though.
Kenra, perfect for sneaking through additional damage right now. Doubling up the amount of damage that he's representing here. 4 points coming through. Dominguez dropping to 15 as he gets the second knight off this History of Benalia.
Yeah, great card to have here. It would have been even better though if Javier was a little bit lower life total, because this problem is just gonna keep coming turn after turn, and it's not like Joachim can wait either, because these knights have vigilance, gonna keep on attacking, meaning that he's gonna be pressured to make a move towards these knights at some point, and there is a good chance that these knights are just gonna be worth 1 card each, basically, against the mono red deck, especially countering this Unclocked Crasher.
Yeah, that's the most expensive card, at least in the main deck for Joachim Stalin Nilsson. Getting hit by a Disallow there, 3 mana on each side being spent, and ultimately that kind of working out best for Javier Dominguez here. Just the 1 creature attacking in Earthshaker Kenra.
Yeah, I think Javier doesn't have a lot of action in his hand. I think he has maybe a seal away by the rest of it being lands. However, he does have that Memorology Genius, so he will be able to refill once he can sacrifice that. And I think it was smarter to not trade against the Earthshaker Kenra, getting a bit of information if Joachim Salle has tons of lands in his hand. If he has tons of lands, that Earthshaker can come back, of course, for 6 mana, which is not something Javier wants. Also, that his Binala was about to go off for its mini overrun effect, so you wanted to get the full value before trading with any of these knights.
So Seal Away dealing with Earthshaker Kenra, the perfect answer to the Eternalized creature. And while they both have a similar number of lands in play, Javier Dominguez, this is exactly where he wants to be, whereas for Joachim Stalin Nilsson, he's a little bit flooded here on 5 lands.
Interestingly enough, Javier doesn't attack there into this 1/2, which I think is smart, because if Joachim has some kind of removal here, he will just be able to eat up both of the knights, one with the shock and one with the, of course, prowess trigger, with the Solskjaer Mage blocking one of the knights.
I mean, of course, if it works out that Joachim Stalin Nilsson has to play multiple cards to deal with those knights, that's great for Javier. He's found some card advantage there. As things stand, he's found one of the best cards. We've been speaking about it a lot for this matchup, that being Lyra Dawnbringer.
And I do like that it doesn't run it out here, because Javier does have a negate in his hand, so if he can just survive until next turn, which doesn't seem like a big problem on this board, he can play Lyra Dawnbringer with that negate mana up, and that's usually just spells doom for the red deck. And now he doesn't really care about Joachim having, say, a Lightning Strike to the face while blocking with Solskjaer Mage, because he just wants to empty Joachim's hand as much as possible, so there's less and less chance that he will at some point be able to deal with Lyra Dawnbringer, which is going to take over the match here. I don't see a way out for Joachim anymore.
Yeah, Earthshaker Kenra coming down. Yes, it can mean that that knight is unable to block. Lyra Dawnbringer, though, one of the best blockers you'll ever see. First strike, lifelink, Flying means it can block everything, and a 5/5 body means that very unlikely any attacks. Indeed, Stella Nilsson does just pass things back. Javier Dominguez going from strength to strength here, draws a Settle the Wreckage so that even if something big comes along next turn and there's some huge attacks, he has an answer. And the life totals, they go from 10 to 10 to 5 to 15 for Javier Dominguez. Who let these control decks gain life, eh? This doesn't seem remotely fair.
Yeah, even if Joachim had a chance of being able to raise in this position, Settle Wreckage clearly makes that impossible, as if it already wasn't impossible with that Lyra Dawnbringer, and the game's over.
Yeah, Javier Dominguez having a relatively straightforward game 3, a little bit of a stumble from Stella Nilsson having to take a mulligan there, and ultimately Dominguez finding the cards that he needed to be able to win that one out. So good stuff. We do still have a blue-white deck in our semi-finals. We will be going to our semi-finals soon enough. There's one match that we had off camera, that being the match between Tim Kernke and Christian Ahlström, and that's the one where we're not quite sure on the results for it thus far.
Right.
But Francisco Sanchez with Red-Black Chain Whirler, he defeated Lucas Bajon also on Chain Whirler. We obviously just saw Javier Dominguez advancing through with his blue-white approach deck against the mono-red Flame of Kelm list of Joachim Stella Nilsson. And top of our top 8, we started things off with our number 1 seed, Tobias Maurer, going a relatively straightforward 2-0 against Martin Dang's blue-white control. Dang not quite drawing the cards that he needed and succumbing under the pressure of these red decks.
Right.
These red decks simply not to be denied in this standard format.
Nope. There is still one lone hero that can pave the way for anything that's not a red deck, and that's, as we just saw, Javier Dominguez with his blue-white control deck, and we'll see if he can go through the trenches of all these red cards, or if it's going to be the red mages that's going to stay on top.
So we're going to have a look at the bracket now as it stands. Tim Kernke did win his match against Christian Arnsen, and that means that we are very, very close indeed to being able to have our semi-finals. It's going to be Maura Dominguez. Dominguez, the 10th ranked player in the world. He was a finalist in the World Championships, succumbing to William Jensen in that final. So certainly the player in this Final Four with the most experience at the highest level. But at the same time, everyone else will be on the play against him in this top 4, because Francisco Sanchez, that's the number 3 seed. Tim Kernke, he's the number 2 seed. Tobias Maurer, that's the number 1 seed. And then in 5th seed, that is Javier Dominguez, the one blue-white player in an otherwise very red sea.
Yep. Nothing to add there.
It's going to be a tricky one, but you know what? If there's a player that can find a way of completing things against these red decks, the players are just sorting themselves out. We'll be ready for you with our semi-finals soon enough. Do not go anywhere. Semi-finals of Grand Prix Copenhagen going to be very, very soon approaching. We will see you after those breaks. It will be Riley and Simon for your semi-finals here at Grand Prix Copenhagen.